Okay, I am excited / I feel like this may be a lot for you. Like, well, you will know all these, I think, but I'm not trying to trick you.
I may not know all of them, to be quite honest.
Because in the United Methodist Church,
Yeah,
the UMC,
the old UMC,
we have a strong love of abbreves, which is an abbreviation for abbreviation.
yeah.
We like a little acronyms.
Yes.
We love them. So let's see.
All right.
You ready?
Mm-hmm.
The first one I thought of was DLT.
District Leadership Team.
That's right. Good job.
I'm going to give myself snaps.
Okay. I'm sorry. Did you?
No.
Okay. Then DCOM.
District Committee on Ministry.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Oh, gosh. I was really worried there
Got
for a
really
second.
nervous. Then BOM, also sometimes called the Boom.
The Boom, which is weird because it should be the bomb, but...
Oh, yeah. That's
yeah,
true.
English.
But it's not.
Board of Ordained Ministry.
That's right. Weird things most people have not heard us talk about.
I do get nervous on these. I'm like, is that right?
Yeah, here's another one. This is one that people probably have heard us use because sometimes we talk about it in worship, usually with offering.
Yeah.
UMCOR,
which actually I don't know, but I do know in general. United Methodist, I don't know if it's committee or commission.
It's committee.
On relief.
Yeah.
United
Methodist Committee on Relief. Yeah. There are like a million. Like I started to make a list and then you were like, hey, maybe we don't need 50.
It's deep and wide.
Yeah. One time I realized like when we make announcements, sometimes we are speaking a foreign language.
Yeah.
It can be really confusing.
Yeah. There's Christianese and then there's Methodist abbreviations, which is a whole nother deep cut.
Yes. It's very particular.
Yeah.
And so that's what we wanted to kind of talk about today is the particular because we last week and the week before, starting on April 23rd, I believe, we just had the United Methodist General Conference. And there was some exciting and new things that came out of that.
Yes.
And so we wanted to do our best to sort of give some context to folks and kind of explain a little bit the beginning of a conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
About what this means and what this looks like and kind of give an overview so that a lot of our folks who are new to the UMC can understand what's going on.
Yep.
So that's what we're talking about today, General Conference and what that means for Katy First.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
I'm Becca. I'm the pastor of family ministries here at Katy First.
And I'm Mark. I'm the senior pastor here at Katy First.
And welcome to a very special edition of the Katy First Family Podcast. We're excited. Today's lesson may be about ideas and inspiration and more about information.
Yeah, for sure. And this is our first special edition, which is kind of
I'm very excited.
I will say, I think there needs to be a caveat to this.
Yeah, do it.
Because a lot of what we're talking about at General Conference pertains to the topic of human sexuality and some changes that have happened in the church. And so just to be mindful of that, if you're a parent that listens to this with your kids, first off, that'd be great. I didn't know anyone that's doing that. But you might just be mindful of that. Or for anyone that maybe this conversation might trigger some sort of emotional or deep reaction. We understand that and are sensitive to it. So just a heads up that that's where we're headed as we talk about some of the things that are happening in the UMC.
Yeah. So I'm going to do my best to give a really brief overview of some structure so that we understand what we're even talking about with General Conference as far as like how it all works out. And having said that, I know that one of the blessings at Katy First is we have so many retired clergy.
We got a deep bench.
So I'm asking for their forgiveness if I get it wrong.
Yeah.
And like
we even
grace.
have a bishop.
I know. We are so fancy. We
Yeah.
are so lucky to have all these great people. So I'm going to do my best, but also please don't report me. That's what I'm saying. Try not to poke too many holes. So the United Methodist Church, we love some method. We love some structure. And so we have a fairly complicated one. I heard it last night at our meeting. I heard it really well explained that the United Methodist Church grew up alongside the United States. And so some of our structure sort of mimics how our government structure, which just may be helpful as far as an understanding of like how we're put together. Yeah. So the UMC is structured in such a way that there is a focus on like the local church. Obviously, our local church is Katy First.
Yep.
Every local church belongs to an area, like we're all connected. We talk about the connection a lot. And in a particular area of other United Methodist churches, you form a district, right? And you have a district superintendent, which is a pastor, a clergy person, an ordained clergy elder, who is responsible for the churches and the pastors in that area. In our conference, you have 5 districts. So you are at Katy First in the Southwest District.
Yep.
And then we are part of the Texas Annual Conference, which makes it sound like all of Texas, which is inaccurate. I believe there are 5 annual conferences in Texas. That may have shifted recently.
Yeah, I can never actually remember
but
where Texas is at now.
So it is a big, wide-spanning conference. And it's called the Texas Annual Conference because we do all gather together once a year in order to discuss like what we need to do to like kind of, just the business of all of these churches that are held in connection together. But it doesn't stop there. We have our annual conference, but we are part of a jurisdictional conference as well.
So we're sort of like expanding geographically larger and larger as we keep talking.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So part of Texas is the Texas Annual Conference, right? And then you push out a little bit more and you're in a jurisdictional conference. Jurisdiction is responsible for, among other things, electing bishops, right? And then all of the annual conferences and jurisdictional conferences make up the general conference. So that is global. That's all of us. We all get together and we only do that every 4 years.
Yes.
So just like very particular, Katy First in the Southwest District of the Texas Annual Conference inside the South Central Jurisdiction. I know. Isn't that crazy?
It's a mouthful. Yeah.
So it is really confusing.
Yeah.
But we're sort of structured in such a way to provide some checks and balances, just like our government, right? You have your city, your state, your local, and then your federal as well.
Right.
And so we have the general conference has sort of what we would consider like legislative power, right? They make the polity, the policies and procedures that are in our book of discipline that we use to govern this global denomination.
Yeah.
And there are checks on that. There's the judicial council, which can be like, nope, that's against the rules, or no, you're not interpreting that correctly.
Yeah.
So I recognize that that's kind of confusing, but if you have no understanding of kind of the structure, then saying, hey, these things came out of general conference doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Because what we're essentially saying is that at general conference, where they're supposed to, through elected delegates that we send there from our annual conferences, they are supposed to meet and have conversations and votes about how we govern ourselves.
That's right.
Using the book of discipline. And some things changed in our book of discipline at general conference this year.
I want to say something that you said there quickly, but I just want to make sure people heard. Out of all of our annual conferences, we personally elect the clergy and laity who are going to go on our behalf to general conference.
Yep.
And general conference is made up 50-50, laity, clergy.
Yep. And
every annual conference does that. So these, just like you said, they are the voice of their annual conference.
Yeah. These aren't some like foreign people you have no idea.
They're elected upon, and sent on our behalf.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's so they got together, they had some conversations. Now, typically in the last several years, these have been fairly heated, these gatherings, the general conference, where people had some really strong feelings and some pretty big disagreements.
Yep.
And I think we were all kind of braced for that.
Yeah.
And because of that, there was kind of like a stalemate often at general conference. We just couldn't move forward in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And we were just sort of braced for that to sort of happen again this year.
Right.
But that's not what happened.
No. It was very different.
We were a little surprised. Maybe a lottle.
Maybe a lot of surprise. A lot of surprised is correct.
Yeah. So just some highlights. You want to give us some highlights of what happened?
Yeah, so some of the big things. And we'll start with the one that probably everyone has sort of heard about. Maybe you've seen news articles. And to be quite honest, obviously we haven't read all those news articles. They may have said it correctly. They may not have gotten all the nuance. And so there'll be a lot of nuance in the coming days and weeks, which I will just say, by the way, if you are a Katy First member attender, May 26th, we're going to have our next quarterly meeting. We're also going to be talking about this there. But if you're not a Katy First person, don't worry about that. But we'll still be talking about it. But sort of the big one. So the big one that everyone's talking about is the removal of restrictive language on human sexuality, particularly for LGBTQ persons.
Yep.
So that sort of equates to two big areas. And the first one we'll say just for people who can be ordained in our church as a deacon or an elder. That previously, if you were a man or a woman who is in a same sex or same gendered marriage or even a relationship, our language was restrictive in that it explicitly stated that was one thing that kept someone from being able to be ordained. That was it couldn't happen. And now we have to revisit the language per se, because I think it's been harmful, to be quite honest. And so without reading it, what you would need to know is anywhere where that language was built in, you could essentially go back into our old book of discipline and put a line through it.
Yeah, just cross
meaning
it right out.
it took it out. It did not build in new language. It removed it. Some have said what that means is it's neutralized it. They've used this language of it's made it neutral, where that means if you are a man or a woman who's in a same sex or same gendered relationship or marriage, no longer is there a restriction on you being able to follow what you feel like is your call into ordained ministry. And so that's kind of one big one. And no longer can that for our BOD, Board of Ordained Ministry, that's no longer something that they have to look at and say, well, yeah, that can't go any further, because they still emphasize what it means for someone to have the gifts and graces as it is for any of us to follow into this call, and now that is no longer something that has to be into that consideration. Then the second one has to do with weddings or marriage, and previously pastors in the UMC could not perform a same gendered or same sex ceremony without penalty. They could do it, but that would be what had been considered a chargeable offense, and then you could lose your credentials as a pastor or be brought forward on trial. Similar, the language has been removed and the penalties have been also removed.
Right.
So what does that mean? That means that a pastor now has the choice. They are neither forced if they don't want to,
right.
But neither are they penalized if they do want to perform these marriages.
Right.
And so again, the language of neutrality is sort of, it's made it neutral.
Right.
And that's always been the stance, at least for pastors. A couple could come to you or I, and we, in our premarital counseling, could go, I don't think you're ready to be married.
Right.
You always had the choice as a pastor. And that means that is still true. Pastors have that choice. It's just now they can't be penalized for doing that. So pastors who seek to do that and want to do that are now able to, which is a big deal.
And it warrants saying at that point too, that like you're saying, that's always been the case, right? And that there was a very specific petition to make sure, at General Conference, a petition to make sure that you're not penalized for however you decide.
Exactly. Either way,
yes.
There will be no penalty either way. And then if you so there's a pastoral decision on that, but then there's also local churches, and local churches can make that sort of decision in-house on how they want to handle that issue. And it's
what they want to host in
what
their
they want to
space.
host in their space.
Right.
And so, so that leaves a little, it brings a lot of the choice down to pastors and to churches on how they handle that and how they navigate it. And again, just to emphasize, it's this place of neutrality. You can choose without penalty either way.
Yep.
It makes it possible. So those are kind of the big ones. And then I'll get to what is also our social principles.
Yeah.
And it was said last night at our meeting, the social principles don't necessarily speak for the United Methodist Church. There's a whole bunch of issues, every issue under the sun.
A lot. You'd be surprised.
Very,
the breadth of
absolutely.
stuff covered.
That very thoughtful, deep conversation is had where they've tried to come up with some language about essentially, hey, what does our faith as United Methodists say to this topic or issue? Mm-hmm. And then a team of people got together, said, this is what it is. This gets approved. Those were revised this year. Mm-hmm. And amongst all of those, the one that pertains to this conversation is marriage. And I do want to read this because I got it. Because I think it's important. So it says, marriage is a sacred lifelong covenant that brings two people of faith. And then there's a parentheses. What does that mean? Adult man and adult woman of consenting age, or two adult persons of consenting age, into a union with one another and into deeper relationship with God and the religious community. So that's how our principles, which were social principles, have said this is what we, and you'll notice in there that parentheses, and this is where we are a worldwide church. Mm-hmm. And the UMC is not all of one mind.
Right.
And how they understand this in every area of the world.
Right.
And this is one way in which the church got together and said, we can make a compromise here. Mm-hmm. And this is one version of that compromise, because when defining two people of faith as either adult man and an adult woman of consenting age, we would say that's probably the more traditional view of what marriage has been in the church.
Right.
Or two adult persons of consenting age. This allows for those two to be understood. Mm-hmm. The reason that it's also sort of this example of coming together is that it shows we have both these views in our church.
Right.
A more traditional view of it, and one that's more expansive, that includes same gender and same sex marriages.
Yeah.
And they're both expressed there. And it's as if the church is saying, we can have two understandings of this and still move forward in mission together.
Yeah.
And imagine that on a global scale. That's a big deal. So that language changed around marriage. And so that's kind of the big stuff. That's the headline things that sort of shocked you and I.
Yeah.
I think shocked everyone, because
for sure.
we didn't anticipate that language getting removed so quickly.
Yeah,
we thought it might eventually.
Yeah. But we've been arguing about it as a denomination for a long time.
Yes. Since 1972, when the first restrictive language portions got put in there. Yeah. It's been in debate since then. So this is over 50 years. Yeah. So this is a big deal, a massive shift. And for it to just have happened, and by the way, to have happened not with like 51% majority.
Yeah, it wasn't even close.
93% majority on the big votes removed all this restrictive language.
Yeah.
Which is astonishing.
No debate on the floor. It just happened.
Amazing. So really amazing stuff. So those are the big ones.
Yeah.
I'll hit on two more. And one of them is this big idea that you'll begin to hear of called regionalization. We don't have to get into big detail on this because, one, it's not totally finalized. Mm-hmm. This will have to go through all our annual conferences also for approval. But also, it's just like super complicated.
Super complicated. We were getting it explained to us last night by the bishop and some of the delegates, and like you thought that that DLT and BOM were confusing.
Oh boy,
brace yourself.
But let me give you the best 30,000 short.
I'm excited.
Answer view of it.
I want to see how you do it.
Yeah,
I have faith in you.
The big idea, regionalization. Just think it of as. Formerly, the United Methodist Church was very U.S.-centric. A lot of our law and discipline was based around a U.S. understanding and U.S. law. Mm-hmm. And then those that were outside of our United States areas had a little more contextual agility to sort of form, but it was also very U.S.-centric. Regionalization sort of makes us all on the same playing field.
Yeah.
The U.S. is not kind of the central driving everything. We're all split into these big regions, and we still will share the most important parts about what makes us United Methodists in our doctrine and theology. But there will now be the ability for there to be more contextualization on some topics in different areas of our world. That's the shortest version of it.
Yeah.
What does all of that entail? That's kind of getting down, and we could spend a long time down in there.
So one of the things that's really important to understand in this idea of regionalization, right, is that the core sort of value in United Methodism has been that we will do what we need to do for the sake of the mission. And the mission of the United Methodist Church is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And so there's always been this idea of like, hey, if in this part of the world you need to make some rules that make sense for you, we want you to do that so that you can make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world.
Right.
And so, but that has not applied to the U.S. We've been sort of bound by the rules with no ability to be as flexible as maybe we need to be in our context. And so the regionalization is just a way that the General Conference, again, this global body, was like, maybe the U.S. does need some of the same flexibility that we've had. And so it's not, it feels like a weird thing, but it actually just makes sense for our core value of being able to serve the mission.
Yeah, it makes us more agile contextually. It makes us more equitable globally.
Makes us more what?
Equitable. Equitable.
That's good.
So that's a big one that if we got into the weeds,
we'd be here for a year.
We'd lose me because I'd be like,
I'm going to take a nap right now.
Yeah. And then one more that's worth saying because it impacts half the people in this room.
I mean, it impacts you too.
Well, I guess it does.
But it's not as thrilling for you, probably.
So you, I'm telling this for the crowd, not to you.
Gotcha.
You're ordained as a deacon.
I am ordained as a deacon.
And we have two areas of ordination in the church, an elder and a deacon. Yep. And previously, the deacons didn't have sacramental authority, which, what does that mean? What that meant was, like when we do communion, I always preside over the communion elements.
If people are watching, there's a moment where I step to the side.
Right.
Because that's your role.
Because I do that. Or another elder who would be ordained as an elder would do that part.
Right.
Or when we do a baptism.
Right.
It's me who's going to put the water.
Right.
And under that sacramental authority, that's the role of elders, or in my case, licensed local pastor. But this now gave that sacramental authority to deacons, which is wonderful. So you will be able to preside communion. You'll be able to baptize kids, adults, anyone, and that's a big deal. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and again, it was just like, it was an understanding of, hey, this is the mission of the church. Our deacons are often in positions where they need to be able to do that because not every deacon serves inside the church. Yeah. And so they may need to be able to provide communion to the places where they are. And so, I mean, it's a part of a larger thing. Yeah. But I'm very excited.
Yeah. So those are like those are the highlights. There's a lot more, but those are the big ones. And obviously the language around human sexuality, the removal, the restrictive language, the neutrality of it. It's a whole new day in the church. And even regionalization is a whole new day, but that's just one that's kind of still in motion and still we'll see the effects of. And deacons. So it's all big stuff. Yeah. Let's talk about so
what does that mean for Katy First?
What's that mean for us?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a few things, right, that we want to make sure that we're clear about. Yep. I think one is that a lot of this is already how we're living at Katy First. Not in that we were ever contrary to the book of discipline. That would be inaccurate to say.
Correct.
But rather, we as a congregation had a shared value of inclusion and of practicing welcome and radical hospitality and wholehearted acceptance. And so now that neutrality that has happened in the book of discipline allows us just to live into that more.
Correct.
And that is exciting for our congregation.
I agree. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then also, I think we need to just kind of be aware, and maybe this is just my, I feel a little protective of our beloved family, of some potential misinformation that could make things confusing.
That's very true. Yeah.
Right? So like we already said, that pastors have never, ever been forced to do weddings they didn't want to do, right? Or churches have always been able to write their own policy and procedures for how they use their buildings in a number of ways.
Correct.
Right? We heard a pastor last night who was talking about how his church, because they have a really beautiful sanctuary in the middle of downtown Houston, that they had to write into their policy years ago that they only do Christian weddings because people just wanted the space. Yeah. Right? And so it's always been really up to the local church to decide those things. I think it's also important to say that the Board of Ordained Ministry has always been discerning and looking at a person. That's right. Not just this list of qualities, right? They're looking for effectiveness in ministry, fruitfulness in ministry, when they decide who's going to be ordained. I was ordained last year. I can tell you that, first of all, it took me 9 years to get to that step. It doesn't take everybody that long, but I'm special. And that it was a 3-hour interview process the day of. And that's after submitting paperwork, and it is just an involved process. It's not like just anybody walks in. There's a lot of checks and balances, and it should be. It's an important responsibility that we're putting on our clergy, and we want to safeguard clergy as well as we really want to safeguard our congregations. We want to do no harm. Yes. So I also, just in general, because we are talking about human sexuality, I think it's important to note that one of the things we ask of clergy is that they would practice celibacy and singleness and faithfulness in their marriage. And that's still the case. Yeah. That this is not just, because I feel like this language is going to be a part of this misinformation. Sure. That there's just a free for all. That's not true. Yeah. And that's just a way to I think do a little bit of fear, drumming up a little bit of fear. Yeah. We're still to who we are today, who we were yesterday. Yeah. Of wanting to follow closely with where God is calling us. Yeah. And we're excited about seeing that embrace of God, which language the bishop was using. Yeah. Just get wider and wider and wider. And not that it ever wasn't, but that we're getting to see that lived out in our churches. Yes. What a beautiful thing is we're getting close to Pentecost. Right? To get to see that in our congregation, that moving further and further out in the world. I love that. I'm excited. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for both of us, it's last week in particular, there's 2 weeks of General Conference. The last week was where a lot of these votes happened, was just whoo! It just felt like the ground was moving underneath you. Yes, it was just surprising. So, and I think in one sense, it's a little shocking. Yeah. In another sense, we both welcome this. I think Absolutely. We're both excited about this. I think we're both excited for our church family. I think it helps us continue to be the church that we have been striving to be in bigger and more expansive ways. So this is all, on our end, received as very good news. Yeah. At the same time, I recognize for a lot of people, it hits in a lot of different ways. Yeah, for sure. And we are pastors who are pastors not just for a little people or a small amount of people, but for all people. Yeah. And, I think for anyone who's trying to understand all this, both of us are people who would sit down and gladly have 100%
heartfelt conversations, wrestling with it, trying to understand it. ask the hard questions, because neither one of us are afraid of those in any direction in how you go in this. And I think, especially for our church family, but honestly, this extends to anyone who might be listening to this.
Yeah.
You could reach out to Becca and I, and we would love to talk with you, to help you understand this, to anything in any way that this pertains, because we are excited, and we recognize we're all in different places trying to wrap our minds around it.
Yeah.
And so I think knowing that we've got a lot of resources, we'll put some of those in the show details here that can help you understand this. If you're, thinking about what would I do to talk with my kids? How do I talk with, there's a lot to that. And this is the beginning of us being able to have these conversations as a church, with one another. And honestly, I think conversations is where all this happens best. Yeah. Sit down and non-anxiously have a conversation with love about it. So for us, it's as kind of shocking and like, woo, this has been, there's also this sort of just excitement, energy. Yeah. This is good.
Yeah. It's so evident in like the character of our congregation that this is a place where we don't all have to agree, but what we have agreed to is to genuinely love God and love others. Yeah. And because we have like ardently want to follow that, we like when we don't agree about particular things, we find a way to still be at the table together. Yeah. And anticipate finding blessing in the middle of our disagreements when we come to that table together. We come to Christ's table, not the UMC's table, but Christ's table together. We know that Christ is there and that we'll be blessed. Yeah. Because Christ is there and because we're all there together. Yeah. And when we hold that in the middle, we can hold a lot of things together in tension and love. Yeah. I mean, honestly, if you have followed this whole conversation, God bless you and keep you. Because it's a lot. It's a lot for us. And we had to like take classes about this. Yeah. I've had finals. Yeah. And they were easier than this.
Yeah. I think I want to say one more thing.
Say whatever you want, Mark.
Well,
speak, Pastor Mark.
In our Wesleyan tradition, we have those 3 rules of Wesley: do good, do no harm, stay in love with God. We mentioned that, I think, a few weeks ago. Yeah. And I think the do no harm of that, just to highlight that, because, these conversations, they impact real people in their real lives, in a lot of different ways. And I think what you and I both celebrate in the removal of this language doesn't undo a lot of harm for 50 years that the church has been a part of.
100%.
And to move forward with a lot of grace, but to also recognize, I don't know how to put that into words, but to know that there's been a lot of harm. Yeah. And what's it mean for us to continue to do no harm? Yeah. To the best of our abilities, and just because some language has been dropped. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean there's a lot of work for us in building churches that, as much as we aspire to be welcoming and inclusive, you can't just say that. Yeah. And
100%.
So I think there's a lot of good work, and I hope that, and I've seen that this congregation that we both are blessed to be at, wants to be that kind of people. And is going to keep trying to do that. Yeah. And I think that's why we celebrate it. Mm-hmm. And there's a grain of salt in that, just realizing this doesn't change something overnight. Mm-hmm. Love is still going to push us and ask of us to maybe recognize some of those harms and some existing ones, and how we can continue to do the work of expanding that table as we're all trying to follow Jesus Christ and to live that out.
Yeah, we're still going to keep asking the question, what does love require of us, and trying faithfully to answer that. Yeah. I love it. Yep. No pun intended. Maybe a little bit. Well, we appreciate that you have tuned in. We know this one is a little bit longer than others. So again, thanks for sticking it out. We want to make sure that you know that you can always go to our website, katyfirst.org, and you can find more information. Specifically, if you're looking to reach out to us to ask questions, get our contact information, our little emails are on there. I'm doing typey hands that you can't see. Yeah. But you can shoot us an email and let us know. And we want to be in conversation.
Absolutely.
As a church about this.
Yeah. And just to reiterate, if you call Katy First home, we'd love to see you on the 26th. I know it's Memorial Day weekend. It was just the quickest Sunday opportunity we could find. Yeah. Before summer gets crazy. So anyway, 26th, if you're here and you're in town, Katy First home.
We're going to eat, right?
No, we're not eating this time. Sorry.
I'm going to edit that out then.
Yeah, don't tell them. I can tell them. Then It'll be after service in our sanctuary. Okay. We'll talk a little bit more about this and some of just the other stuff that happened in the church. But just to keep that conversation going, you have more questions, you want to talk with us. And yes, do reach out to us. We'd love to talk with anyone more.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Until then, we usually say have a great week. We'll see you again some point, maybe on Sunday, maybe next time back here on the podcast for whatever we're talking about.
I was like, next. Why aren't we seeing them Sunday? I panicked. I was like, but you're saying if you're not hearing Katy First. I get it now. Okay. I panicked. I was like, why aren't we seeing people? Do we have a trip I don't know about?
No.
Nah, if you're worshiping with us, we'll see you on Sunday at 11 o'clock.
Yep.
Have a great week.
I waved this time.
It was cute.